I'm not an office person. I never would be an office person. So this job for me was just it's a dream come true. It really is a great job, and I'm very fortunate to have it.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Forest Rangers. Who are they and what do they do? Well, I thought I knew the answer, but when I tried to list all the things rangers do, I couldn't even come close to accurate. So it's high time we find out. And the way this show came about is itself so typical of Maine. Early in August, I was eating breakfast at Helen's restaurant in Machias before heading out for a day of adventure down east. One table over, 2 forest rangers were chatting over eggs and coffee. One of them was Ranger Jeff Courier. We got to talking, and I got to thinking. You know, Maine forest rangers have been around a long time, but besides putting out fires and enforcing many of our natural resource laws, I really don't know what they do. Well, for starters, our forest rangers are the fire department for over half the acres in the state, and we kind of take them for granted. But not anymore, because I'm now right in Jeff's office in Old Town. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, and EBS. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Bob. Thanks for the opportunity.
What is your official title?
I am a regional forest ranger with the Maine Forest Service, and that's part of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do they call you? Ranger Jeff, Officer Jeff? I actually don't even know what people are supposed to call you.
Yeah, you can call me Regional Ranger Courier, but you can call me Jeff.
Okay. Well, you put out fires, you investigate timber theft. Beyond that, as I started to think about it, I said, I really don't know what you do.
Yep, we have a really good job. We feel it's an important job, but it's diverse, and I think there are a lot of parts of the job that are somewhat hidden from the public. So anytime we can talk about that, we want to.
Okay, well, what parts are most hidden?
Well, I think people are surprised at our role in incident management and disaster response. Each forest ranger in Maine is highly trained in what's called the incident command system, and we respond to disasters and emergencies in Maine and all over the country, and we're expected to be strong partners and strong cooperators with Maine's Emergency Management Agency in times where we might be needed for a flood, or a hurricane, or a winter storm, and I think that confuses people because so much of their association for what we do is fire, and that is the most important part of our job, without a doubt. So when it's raining and blowing, and trees are coming down, and power is out in places, and there are floods, they don't necessarily think of forest rangers first.
Right.
And that's part of what we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Do people get surprised when you show up at a flood?
I think so. But that's okay, because we would like to think that we can very quickly show them our added value. We're not perfect. We learn things every day. We are humble, but we are also pretty proud of our skill set when it comes to managing people, managing resources, and dealing with complex and emergent incidents like floods, like ice storms. So we show them very quickly what we can do.
You spend a lot of time in the woods, especially around harvests. Are all rangers foresters by training, or
no? No, we have some are. We have a hiring requirement in our department that you have at least an Associate of Science degree with a preference for fire science or forestry. So everybody has to meet the grade that way before you can even get on. We do have some licensed foresters on staff that are rangers, and we also have another division within the Forest Service called the Division of Forest Policy and Management. Those folks are mostly all foresters. And so in the same way a game warden can utilize the services of a biologist in the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, we do the same with our foresters. They're the technical experts when it comes to matters of forestry.
I think what was fascinating on the website, because I did go look, is the requirements for getting the job in the first place. As you say, associate degree or equivalent experience and training. You need a driver's license.
Mm-hmm. You do.
Because they give you a truck.
They do. Yeah, they sure do.
Okay, and a physical fitness test.
Yeah, and in fact, our physical fitness test is probably the most aggressive in all of state government. We have a push-up test, a sit-up test, and it's quite involved. So when people come to get hired by us, they have to be prepared for that test. And for us as an agency, because of the nature of where we work and how we work, you have to maintain that fitness. And our department is great in doing that very thing. We encourage our people to take time to be fit. And we do assessments every year so people can gauge how they're doing. We provide counseling services for physical fitness because it's not all just riding around in that truck. You have to exert yourself a lot. When we have fires on the Appalachian Trail, and you've got to hike an hour to get to that fire. That takes its toll, and if you're not fit, you're going to know it pretty quick.
So the requirements to maintain that fitness, you are tested periodically?
Yes, every year. We have a physical fitness assessment. We have a physical fitness team that specializes in doing those tests, in how to counsel and give guidance to people on what to do to improve their fitness. So, yeah, it's a big deal to us.
That's the beauty of radio, is couch potatoes can qualify for this job. I was looking at this final screening that you go through. You have to meet the qualifications, and then they screen you for a whole bunch of judgment calls, and I wrote them down. Commitment and independence, you have to be able to demonstrate that. You're rated on it. Judgment and logic, communication skills, applied knowledge, decision-making, decisiveness, tact, and diplomacy. You're actually rated on that before you're hired. Motivation, leadership, problem-solving skills. They don't pay you enough if you can pass this test.
Well, I think we get paid enough. I'll tell you, I give thanks for this job every day. I really do, because it is a great job. It's not a job, though. To call it a job is not giving it full credit. It's a lifestyle. And with regard to all of those things that we require of our people, that's in part due to the nature of who we are and what we've been entrusted with. We've been given a great deal of the public's trust. They trust us when it comes to protecting their homes from wildfires. They trust us as law enforcement officers that we'll be faithful and honest and true. And as an agency, as a leader in this agency, I have to trust the people below me to be able to work independently, because Maine is it's not a big state, but it's not a small state either. And with a ranger covering about 1 million acres on his own or on her own on any given day, that's what they're responsible for.
1 million acres.
1 million acres.
Oh, my word.
I cannot be looking over their shoulder as a leader in this agency. I have to trust that they're going to do what's expected of them, that they're self-motivated, that they are self-starters, they do what they're told, they follow direction, but a lot of that direction is from inside of them, and they've got to make it work.
Well, I look at this list of things like commitment, independence, judgment, logic, tact, diplomacy, decision-making, problem-solving, and saying, hey, we legislators don't have to do that. We don't have to demonstrate any of those skills.
Well, most of you do.
Tact, diplomacy. You must get yourself into situations where that's useful.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, our public contact is pretty extensive, and I think that people think of the forest ranger as just off in the woods all by himself or herself and never running into people. That's just not the case. We seek public contact. We are not inclined as an agency to kind of wait for people to cause their own problems. If we see something that they're doing that might be illegal or unwise, our goal is to be very forthright and to reach out to them, whether it's somebody about to start a campfire in an area that prohibits campfires, or dealing with a logger who might be making a mistake on a water crossing, or with regard to our Forest Practices Act. We want to prevent violations from occurring in the first place. The tact and diplomacy comes in that, you know, there are times where you're showing up and people aren't happy that you're there. They know they've done something wrong, perhaps, or they just have a general disdain for law enforcement and authority anyway. We run into those people. Most of the people we deal with are great to deal with, but we do run into people who are angry. We run into people who are under the influence of alcohol and drugs sometimes. And so you have to, as a forest ranger, as a law enforcement officer in general, you have to be able to know how to navigate those situations to, A, diffuse a situation, or B, to let people know that you are the authority in a professional, kind, direct, and courteous way. And so tact and diplomacy is an important part of the forest ranger mission.
You have to be able to demonstrate that before you can even get hired. Then do you get training afterwards? Because game wardens have to face the same tact diplomacy situation.
Yeah, the job is quite similar. And, whether you're a state trooper or marine patrol officer or fire marshal investigator, game warden or forest ranger, they're all pretty much the same. So you have to demonstrate that. And we do a lot of work in screening our people before they're even offered a job, a full background investigation, a polygraph examination. We're reaching out to their colleagues, their friends, their former employers to find out what kind of people they are. We want people here for the right reasons. We want them here for the long haul. And so with that, it takes a lot of effort. So we want people of good character right out of the gate, and then we will train you how to deal with some of those more difficult situations, how we expect you to treat people, how you can deal with difficult people and deal with friendly people. We document everything we do, and we want people to understand why we're there. We want people to know that the forest ranger that visited them today was there for the right reasons, that they were trying to provide guidance and oversight to a situation, sometimes correction. And, it's pretty important that our people treat others with respect and dignity.
My guest is Forest Ranger Jeff Courier, and this is another one of those shows where we learn about stuff we thought we already knew. I'm in Jeff's office at the Maine Forest Service near the Old Town Airport. Up next, how often do things really go wrong? This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Today, I'm at the Maine Forest Service office of Forest Ranger Jeff Courier. Forest rangers do a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, they are law enforcement officers. And that could mean occasions when they face a difficult situation where they are called upon to use tact and diplomacy. They're hired for that. They're trained for that. So how often do things go wrong, Jeff?
On the whole, not a lot.
Yeah.
When they go wrong, sometimes they go really wrong, especially if you end up dealing with somebody who may have some mental health issues, and we run into those people. Or they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And unfortunately, we all know that that's not getting better, it's getting worse in our dear state. It happens. And when it happens, it can be kind of dynamic. I would say 95% of the people that we deal with, even those who are in violation and know they're in violation, are good people. Maybe they've made a bad choice. Maybe they've made a bad decision. Then we deal with the other percentage where they're just bad people, and we deal with those. We try and be smart. We try and forecast that as best we can, but really, when you walk into a campsite in Township 36 MD, you don't know who you're encountering. You're there to make sure people are being fire safe, to making sure you're protecting the property owner and the environment, and sometimes that happens. But we are very well trained. And we have good policies that will help protect us as well. And so we hope that our rangers can utilize the policy, the training, and their own judgment to avoid problems in the first place.
Now, it's a little bit of a challenge to fill vacancies. Is that challenge because people can't pass the qualifications, or there just aren't enough people applying now in the first place?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it's both. We're in the middle of a hiring process right now, and anecdotally, we've always said that at each phase of the application process, we generally lose 50% of those people. So, for example, the first phase is filling out the application and seeing if you meet the entry-level requirements just to even move forward. We lose a percentage there. We then put people through the physical test, and we lose about 50% there. Then we do an oral board examination where we ask them a series of questions over an hour to an hour and a half interview. We lose a percentage there. Then comes the background investigation, and we lose people there. We have automatic disqualifiers that
criminal records.
Yeah, and drug use. And then once that's done, the polygraph examination. And if you make it through all of that, you're given an interview with our chief forest ranger, one-on-one, where he takes all of the information that has been presented to him and sits and talks with that applicant and tries to see if they're a good fit or not. Now, I think that's an extensive process, and it's pretty much the same as every other state law enforcement agency in this that we have here in Maine. So it's important to maintain that consistency. But all that being said, the number of applicants for any of those jobs, state troopers will tell you the same thing, wardens will tell you the same thing. We just don't have the applicants that we once had. And I really don't understand it because, you work hard at this job, and you sweat and you get tired, and you have people who are friendly, but you have people who are abusive. It's mostly good all of the time. Why somebody wouldn't want to do this type of job, I don't know. I have friends that make a lot more money than I do, and I'm happy for them. I'm very happy for them. However, I'm happy for me when I am able to do good public service for the citizens of the state, when I'm able to help on a wildfire in Oregon, when I'm able to go to New York City to help on the hurricane. There are a lot more things than money, and this has provided me and my family with a lifestyle that is, one that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Well, it's a lifestyle that doesn't require you to be in an office 100% of the time.
That is a key. I'm not an office person. I never would be an office person. So this job for me was it's a dream come true. It really is a great job, and I'm very fortunate to have it.
Website suggested there's a Forest Ranger Academy.
There is.
I had never heard of that. So what is it?
Well, we do not send our people to the same criminal justice academy that the other agencies do. We send our folks to what's called the pre-service school, which is a 200-hour law enforcement training, and then we take it from there. We establish our own academy, and right now it's in 3 phases. Phase 1, you learn the very basics of being a forest ranger. Phase 2 is your more moderate classes, and then Phase 3 would be your advanced class. So we do that on our own, and it takes some time and it takes some effort. But we feel very confident that our people are well trained. Additionally, our field training program is one of the longest and most extensive of all of the agencies in Maine. Our field training program is 6 months. So a newly hired forest ranger who is on probation for a year has a 6-month field training program where they are pretty much joined at the hip with their field trainer. They don't do anything on their own for 6 months. And the reason we do it for 6 months is because the job is so varied, because there are so many different aspects, and because we want our people to learn. Our work is not seasonal, but it is seasonally affected.
Right, yeah.
The fire mission is a year-round job alone. I can tell anybody that with a straight face. And we can talk about that more in a minute maybe. But we need to see our people and how they're going to perform during fire season, during the fall when we're dealing with illegal bough harvests and more timber harvests, in the winter when we're dealing with timber thefts and trainings and all that. So it needs to be that 6-month period, and that's why we do it that way.
Now, you are law enforcement agents.
We are.
What did you get pulled into that really isn't your first line of responsibility?
Well, because we're out in the fields and forests and all over Maine, we end up at everything from car accidents that we encounter to medical calls. Nearly all of our rangers have wilderness medical training, so we're involved with that. If an officer is in trouble, we'll be there to help them, and that's
somebody calls for backup, and you're
in
the neighborhood. Yep.
Yeah, if it's critical. Now we're very mission focused. We are not going to seek out opportunities to get way outside of our wheelhouse, if you will. It has to be pretty important, pretty dire for us to abandon what we're doing. But I'll tell you, if a state trooper is having a tussle with a suspect, I'm going to be there. I'm not going to be stopping cars on Route 9 or Interstate 95. That's not my role. And we take a lot of pride in that. Mission focused. Our mission focused stance is solid, and the Rangers know it. The leadership knows it. Our job is tough enough, and there's enough to do without getting into other people's business. But when it's critical, we'll be there.
This may be a dumb question, but is your truck equipped with flashing blue lights?
We have red and blue lights on our trucks because we're kind of a hybrid, aren't we? I mean, we're a fire department and we're also a law enforcement agency. So it's an emergency vehicle with all the privileges entitled to us as law enforcement officers and emergency vehicles in our motor vehicle code.
But the likelihood of making a traffic stop is low.
Pretty darn low. Yeah,
I would think so.
Yep.
Today's topic, what exactly is it the Maine Forest Rangers are doing out there in the woods? Jeff Courier has an office in Old Town in the Maine Forest Service building next to the airport. We're in that office right now, but most of the time Jeff is out in the field. Maine is the most forested state of the nation, and we have only 50 rangers watching over it all, including timber theft and timber trespass, which are actually two different things, and I need an explanation. Also in the way, why are they the only law enforcement officials who are not allowed to carry guns? This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. My guest is Jeff Courier, Maine Forest Ranger. Like just about every Mainer, I figured I knew what Maine Forest Rangers did in the woods. Turns out it's a lot more than fighting fires and policing timber harvests. And even the reality about timber theft is different than what I thought it was, Jeff.
It's funny because when we talk about timber theft, people often think of masked villains in the middle of the night rustling timber, stealing, cutting logs and loading them onto a truck quickly and going. Now that does happen. But timber theft that we encounter for the most part is more like timber fraud, where a landowner might hire an unscrupulous logger. And there aren't very many of them. Most of the loggers in this state, the overwhelming majority, are very hardworking, honest people.
And it doesn't take you long to figure out the bad ones.
No. And we know who many of them are.
That's right, yeah.
And we pursue them aggressively. But some of these unscrupulous people will take advantage of a situation. Some of them are even predatory. They'll seek out landowners who might be vulnerable, the elderly, people who live out of state, and they'll have a contract to cut timber on their property. They defraud them by not paying for every truckload. And unless a landowner is there or has an agent there counting the truckloads as they leave, they're not going to know. And that's a role we play. Paying for 3 truckloads in a week when you've cut 5, that's theft. And we take that very, very seriously. We deal with firewood theft as well. That's a little different, but kind of similar. Now, timber trespass is when a logger or a landowner cuts across a property line. Sometimes it's by mistake, and sometimes it's intentional. So we, as part of our inspection work that I mentioned earlier, when we inspect timber harvests, our rangers are expected to walk property lines and see, A, that they're marked as required by law if you're going to cut within 200 feet of a boundary. And if they are marked, to make sure that someone hasn't crossed on the back corner of the lot going after those prize pine trees on the other side of the line. That's timber trespass. Timber theft is more intent, more devious. Timber trespass can be a mistake or it can be intentional.
Imported firewood has become an increasingly critical issue because of the fear of invasive pests. Is that increasing your workload or redirecting your attention more than it used to?
It is. It's a fairly new thing for us. We, as rangers, are charged with enforcing Maine's ban on imported firewood. It's illegal to bring firewood into Maine from outside of Maine, and Maine's not unique that way. Many states have this similar law. But if you look at some of the true, utter devastation of forests in, say, Massachusetts from the Asian longhorn beetle, if you look at the damage that's being caused to ash trees from the emerald ash borer in other states, I think most Mainers will agree that this is important work, that we don't want those pests here. And how they catch a ride sometimes is on firewood. We've done details in the past on the interstate where we'll be at rest areas, and our job there is to educate people, to be very upfront, to be proactive, and when we see someone pop in with plates from out of state that we think might be coming to visit, we'll say, "Hey, did you bring any firewood with you?" "Oh, good, I'm glad you didn't, and here's why I was asking." And it was surprising to me how many people, when, say, I would encounter people in that situation, said, "Oh, yeah, we get why you're doing that, because we have the same law in our state." When we do find people with illegal firewood, it is a violation of law. and they can be charged with that. But oftentimes what we'll do is we'll leave them with a warning, and we'll seize their firewood. The confiscated firewood is then taken to an incinerator where it's very promptly burned. We just don't want it here. And so that has changed a little bit, and it's part of what we do, and it's part of protecting Maine and its forest resources.
So there's two reasons you could walk into a campsite. One is to see if they've got a permit for the fire they're building, and the other is to see if they're burning local wood or not.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And very important, there are all kinds of people in Maine who will be glad to sell them firewood. Well, that's what we want to do, is make sure they're using Maine firewood. You buy it here and burn it here.
Do we have any pests here that are not welcome elsewhere, or is our wood all pure?
I'm not sure that it's all pure. I don't know of any instances where we have Asian longhorn beetle or emerald ash borer. However, there are other things, other quarantines that we have in Maine. For example, European larch canker is a disease that affects larch or hatmatack, tamarack trees. Last check I knew, Washington and Hancock County had a quarantine. You couldn't move larch from those two counties out. So we do have some of that stuff. It's just not as prevalent. But there are all kinds of bad things lurking out there. And with a global economy, with global shipping being more prevalent now than it ever has been, we're going to see more and more of this. And we'd like to think we can play a role to help prevent it.
Fires don't make the news all that often because they're not very big. I was surprised off air when you told me how many we actually have every year in Maine.
Yep.
I was hitting my head saying, what? That many? Really?
Yep.
How come I don't know about that?
Yeah, well, on average, anywhere between 500 and 750 fires a year. Last year was a fairly busy year at 750. We work very closely with the municipal fire service, with organized fire departments in the organized townships to prevent fires from occurring in the first place, to regulate open burning through our open burning permit system, and then when there is a fire, we work together with them in the organized towns and then on our own in the unorganized territories to kill them very quickly. We make no bones about that. We make no apologies for that. Our number one priority is to protect homes from wildfire. Additionally, it is very important in a state like Maine to protect forest resources, as the forest industry is one of the backbones of our economy. It's very, very important. When somebody's trees are burning, it's somebody's asset that is burning, and we take that very seriously. Now, we kind of get ribbed sometimes because we'll often hear from the public or others that, well, when's the last time we had a big fire in Maine? And while you scratch your head at that comment because, you're wondering, well, do you think that our role is not important, or do you just not understand that part of the reason we haven't had a big fire in Maine is because of, in part, our efforts and that of the municipal fire service, whether it's the Bangor Fire Department with a full-time department, or the fire department in the little town of Wesley, Maine, where there are essentially 5 firefighters who keep fires in check in that town.
Bottom line here, about half of Maine is unorganized territory. Along the edges of organized and unorganized rural Maine, the sole guardians between you and property loss due to fire are forest rangers. And let's repeat the fact that there are only 50 of them statewide, and they average a responsibility of 1 million acres of oversight apiece. I've been very guilty of not noticing that fact, but this summer, I personally put out a forest fire. That story is coming up. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. My guest is Jeff Courier, Maine Forest Ranger, and we're talking about all the roles the Rangers play in the state. Chief among them is making sure the most forested state of the nation doesn't burn down. If I ever took that for granted, I don't now, Jeff. I had a real surprise this summer. I was camping up in the Scraggly Lake, Grand Lakes, Seboyce area, and I was just checking out some of the campsites in the area so I would know where I wanted to camp the next time I went back, and I went to one campsite and found the side of the campsite smoldering. Somebody had, basically they had a fire ring. They then dumped the ashes on the side, and it got down into the duff, and I was amazed at how deeply into the duff this fire was still smoldering. there had been no particular wind, but if the wind had come up, bad things could have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. That happens all the time. Last year, we had 105 fires. 105 started in this state from campfires that weren't properly extinguished. That's disappointing. Just this past weekend, we had 4 fires in Maine where we lost 2 cabins and 2 outbuildings on 4 separate fires from fires that weren't fully extinguished. Now, these fires are often found by people like you or our rangers out on patrol, and we can get on them pretty quickly. They tend to smolder in the in the duff layer that you talked about. The duff being the organic material that is on the surface and below the surface, needles, leaves, etc. So they can burn deep, and the duff layer in Maine can be a foot and a half deep. So it can burn for a long time.
Well, we had some cooking pots with us, and we had the lake right next to us. We spent better than an hour just carrying water over and trying to put this thing out, and it just kept smoking.
Yeah, and that's typical. I mean, these fires one of the differences between fires in the West and fires in Maine is if you go out west, if you go hiking in the mountains of Oregon, you can see a fire burning on the surface of the ground. You can walk up and kick that surface layer, and you're down to mineral soil just with your foot. Whereas in Maine and Alaska and northern Minnesota, the duff layer is very, very deep. And it makes for our fires to be very, very labor intensive. It's not unusual for a small fire, even a half acre to an acre in Maine, to become a 3 to 4 day project because it burns so deep. And you can't ignore it because it'll just keep burning.
You got to go down and get it.
You have to dig it out and you have to soak it with water and it means that when we have even an acre fire, that might not make the news, but it's a project. And you have to dedicate the right number of resources to it, the right equipment. And so it doesn't take long in our state. If you have, a dozen of these going across the state, they don't have to be big to be a problem for us.
You talked a little bit earlier, and we were going to come back to it, about the fire prevention being a year-round activity. Do we really have to worry about forest fires in January?
No, we don't have to, but I'll tell you how we kind of map out our season. And it changes from year to year, but for the most part, let's start in April. April and May is what we call our spring fire season. And our spring fire season results in some really intense fires with a lot of structures threatened or damaged and sometimes destroyed, from fires burning in the cured grasses and brush that have died over the winter and driven by winds. That's when we have some of our largest fires in Addison and down east areas that have gone to 500, 600, 700 acres. Some of our largest fires have been caused during that April and May season. In June, we go through what we call a green-up period. It's a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, where the leaves are coming out, the grasses go from that cured to the green. So we have a little bit lower number of fires there. But we start having lightning strikes. So the end of June, into July, August, September, we're going to have fire season in Maine until we get an inch of snow on the ground. Interestingly, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the 1947 fires, which devastated the state. All of those occurred in October. Rangers always have fires on Thanksgiving. Rangers are responding to fires on Thanksgiving. And if the snow is late getting here, we're into December.
Now, arson is a Class A felony, which is the worst of all possible crimes, but people do it. And you're stuck having to enforce that. Yep. I'm a little surprised at how much arson really happens in Maine.
It is. It's very disappointing. We don't know why. It seems to go in cycles. We have had some really high-profile cases, arrests, for arson in the state, in all areas of the state. We don't know what the thrill of it is, but we do know that it's very, very dangerous. And again, we're fortunate that we subscribe to fast initial attack, because I'll tell you, if we have arson problems, they can really be devastating to our homeowners, to our forest landowners, and to our economy. So we take it very, very seriously. All of our rangers are fully certified as fire investigators, and they're expected to be able to take a fire scene and dissect it. Follow the fire's trail back from where we stopped the fire to where the origin area is, and then figure out what the cause is. And we start with basically it's an inverted triangle, and with all of these causes at the top, and we'll work our way down through Was it lightning? Well, there hasn't been any lightning in the last 2 months. Was it caused by a motor vehicle? Well, there are no roads here. What about a railroad? Nope, no railroad tracks within 5 miles. And we work our way down through and try and figure out what happened. And sometimes it turns out that this fire was intentionally set, and that's very serious.
And it happens in some regions more than others, so there's some cultural significance to why it happens where it does sometimes.
There is, and the Washington County area of our state, which is very near and dear to a lot of us, has had problems with arson. I can tell you that 3 years ago now, we had a serial arsonist running around Washington County setting a series of fires, and we put together a task force of rangers and other law enforcement officers. We used technology to finally figure out who was doing it, and we brought them to justice. And they were charged, tried, and convicted, and they went to jail for their deeds.
Another group of people who are committing crimes out there that you have to enforce is illegal dumping.
Yeah, illegal dumping.
I don't think anything makes me more angry.
No,
than
and
seeing
same with
illegal
us.
dump.
It's the scourge of Maine, and it's not what Maine values represent at all. We're fortunate in this state that we have property owners, both large and small, who are pretty gracious in allowing recreational activities on their property without fee, without any hesitation.
They put up with a lot.
They do put up with a lot, and part of our role is to protect them, and we take that very seriously, whether it be from the fire aspect of illegal campfires to damaging roads to illegal dumping. As a forest ranger, I can tell you that I'm an outdoorsman. I'm a dad, a granddad, and I want my kids to have the benefit that I've had, and my grandchildren too, of being able to recreate, to go hunting, fishing, trapping, hiking, biking, all the things that make Maine great. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned because landowners, as you say, do put up with a lot, and when they've been dumped on or had their property abused, that's a problem.
Somebody just stoving up their roads, for instance.
Exactly, and there's a lot of that goes on in the spring. Now, I'll tell you, as a forest ranger, I and my counterparts have to dig through this rubble, and we do. We dig through trash. We put on our rubber gloves, and some of this is some of the most disgusting stuff you'll ever deal with. But at the same time, it is extremely satisfying when you find evidence of who dumped that garbage on someone else's property, and you go to their residence or place of work and you knock on the door and you ask them to explain how their garbage got there. And unless they have a good excuse, and I can't really think of any, they're going to be issued a summons for illegal dumping. And we work closely with our counterparts in the Warden Service. On this issue, we participate in our state's Landowner Appreciation Cleanup Day. We will forward information on convictions for illegal dumping to Inland Fisheries and Wildlife so that consideration can be given to suspend recreational licenses. We take it seriously. We don't like it. We've seen enough of it, and we won't tolerate it. So it's extremely, and I mean extremely rare, that we write a warning for illegal dumping.
Jeff Courier is a state forest ranger. He has an office in Old Town, and that's where we are, but really his office is the great outdoors. Coming up, it's been a little controversial over the last few years. Forest rangers are law enforcement officers, but they're not allowed to carry firearms. What's up with that? This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Jeff Courier is a Maine State Forest Ranger. I'm always surprised to find out what I don't know about stuff. Rangers have been around a long time, and like most folks, I thought I had a pretty good idea of the work they do. Not even close. Now, you are law enforcement officers, and this gets a little touchy. You're about the only law enforcement officers that have traditionally not carried firearms. That has become a controversy over the last few years, and I'm not even exactly sure where it stands now. I think you're allowed to have them, but we're not necessarily budgeting correctly for it. Where does it stand?
Well, no, we don't carry firearms.
Which is weird, because you carry handcuffs. What do? Talk people into putting them on?
Well, yeah. We use those tact and diplomacy and training skills that we talked about earlier to navigate our way through, difficult situations. We are prohibited by policy from carrying a firearm, whether it's our own or anybody else's. And we just are doing our best to make sure our people are being smart in the woods. We use the information and tools provided to us to do as much research as we can on potential violators. We will double up where we need to, and when we need to, we'll ask for help from our friends in the state police or the sheriff's department and try and be as safe as we can.
This has been sort of a multiple issue. One of the questions was, how are we going to pay for it all? Because we always underfund. And the other is, does this lead to mission creep? Are you going to be called into the woods more often when a game warden finds an illegal plot of growing marijuana or something?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting balance. I mean, it's something that the policymakers will debate, and we're going to see which way it goes. But, for me, as a leader in this agency, I'm very committed to the mission that we have. I don't want my mission to change because I know what is at stake, whether it's protecting landowners, protecting homeowners from fire, from protecting our environmental resources, from water quality to forest practices. Rangers have a lot to do, and I think that our taxpayers and our policymakers should know that we take that very seriously, and we're very committed to our mission and our mission alone, and that's where we firmly stand.
So you also get called into search and rescue because who knows the woods better than you guys do?
Yep, we do. We work very closely with the Warden Service and Baxter State Park, Acadia National Park, and EMS agencies across the state to help when somebody's lost or they've gotten hurt. So that's a role we take very seriously as well. We train our people in wilderness medical response. We've been on numerous carryouts of people with injuries in the remote areas of the state. We feel it's important to respond if a logger gets hurt, or a forester, or somebody recreating in Maine's backcountry, because oftentimes we would be the closest one. And so that's not our primary mission, but it's something that we take a lot of pride in, and we feel that we're good partners to these other agencies, and it's worked out well for us.
Your helicopters are designed primarily, or used primarily, to put out fires and to search for fires, but how often do you get called in and search and rescue for wanderers?
Not a lot, but when we do, we provide a skill set with our ranger pilots that it's very unique. We can fly in some adverse weather conditions. We don't fly at night, and we don't fly under instrument conditions, but we can sometimes get to a search area to assist the wardens or a park ranger very, very quickly, and we'll help where we can. And we think that people appreciate that. It's not a lot of time we dedicate to this, but when we do, it's important time. I think anybody would agree that when your loved one is hurt in the woods, when they've lost their way, that it's a full court press, that everybody comes. And that's how we feel we fit into this, and it's worked out well for us. And we're pretty proud to be able to help when we can.
You have a lot of equipment that's unique to your mission that other departments must envy because they don't have it, but sometimes they need it. So there has to be a lot of cooperation between the Warden Service and the Forest Service and other law enforcement agencies who don't have that kind of truck to get back in the woods or that kind of helicopter to carry some heavy gear.
Yep. It is a partnership. And what we have to remind ourselves all the time, it's not a big problem, but we always remind ourselves that this gear that we've been entrusted with does not belong to us. It belongs to the people of the state of Maine. And it's very important to remember that regardless of what the patch says on your shoulder, you are there as a trooper, a ranger, a warden, or whomever to help people. And we'll sort the rest of it out later, but let's get the mission done. If that means moving one of our tracked vehicles to the other side of the county or other side of the state to help out on something, or flying a helicopter, or providing one of our boats to help the wardens on a search for somebody on a lake, or working with Marine Patrol on the offshore islands, we're all really one team, and that's important to remember.
Well, Jeff, we covered a lot of territory. I had in mind when I showed up that you go show me your toys, but we've run out of time. What the Ranger Service does is so extensive that just talking about it has killed an entire radio show. Killed it in about the best way possible by being fully enlightening. So I appreciate the time you spent with me.
No, you bet. This is it's always an honor to talk about Maine and to talk about the role that we play, and we certainly appreciate your dedication to our state in your other role, and your dedication to Maine's outdoors too. And it really makes a difference. This is a great place we live, and the more people hear about it, the better. Yeah,
we send so many of our tourists over to Bar Harbor, and they overlook so much of what the state has to offer. But for those of us who do get out in the woods, and we do see some of those people, it's good to see them appreciating the state the way we do.
I agree.
My guest has been Jeff Courier, Maine Forest Ranger. It's a tough job, but a highly rewarding one. For half the state, these guys are the fire department. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns next Saturday morning at 9, Sunday morning at 8, and it's always online afterwards at 929theticket.com. Brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, and EBS. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.